So tonight, we're going to cover Chapter 2 in the book. Chapter 2 is Law of Agency. And what you want to do with Law of Agency is we're going to go through the entire chapter, and you should mark off in the front inside cover. Again, you want to go to the front inside cover of your book and check off Session B. B as in boy. You want to check off B, and that's the session that we're doing today. So if you were here yesterday and today, then you've got 2 check marks in your book, and this is if you're new. If you've been here right along, you might find that you have many, many check marks in your book. The maximum number of spaces is 14. There's 14 sessions that we have. So if you have already a check mark in this spot, that means you were here before. Whether you remember it or not, you were here. So this should be a review for you. And of course, the session that we emailed to you has lots of great information. Actually has page-by-page information that you want to be aware of. So this is like a nice overview. We're going to do same thing we did yesterday. I actually have some really great information. I'm hoping that the information that I have for you tonight knocks your pants off as far as like really shocks you. Most classes that I've had that I have shared this information with over the years, they absolutely can't believe that this thing exists. And when I share it with you, you may never buy real estate again as the way you have in the past, assuming that you own a home. So I'm going to share that with you, and then you have to make an executive decision if you're going to share that information with future buyers that you represent. Oh, is that ever a tease? Well, you'll see it in a little bit what that's all about. I don't want to ruin the surprise because, you know, I've completely thought through the class, went through the material, and planned out our itinerary for the evening. It's not like I just opened the book and kind of shoot from the hip here. So I want to make sure you have a really good experience. So that's why I plan these things out, even though I've done this hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of times. So you're in good hands, not with Allstate, but with me. So we're going to take good care of you. And of course, we're going to end the night with our wonderful new game, so you can earn not pennies to heaven, but nickels towards your continuing ed for your first license renewal, okay? And of course, this program, I know we have people that come in from all over the world who watch this. This is you're only eligible to earn nickels if you're a paid registrant. So if you want to pay to register, then we're happy to apply those nickels for you as well. So open your book to page 30. Now, hopefully you read the material that we covered yesterday on your own. Your only homework here is to read the material that we've covered. You want to touch every page in your book. If you touch every page in your book, there's no way that you're going to fail the state exam. Now, I don't mean just touch it with your eyes closed. You've got to read it. You've got to take active notes. You have to make up flashcards with all the italicized information, all the bold information, and you want to use our trigger words videos. If you go to our exam review, which is all our exam playlist under our YouTube channel, you can make flashcards from that and you'll probably be fine. But good active reading and studying means that you're not only paying attention in class, highlighting in your book, but you're making flashcards as we go along, okay? So without further ado, and crossword puzzles. Francine reminds me that for crossword puzzles, as you've heard me say before, they're really good. They help give you the bare minimum number of words for your flashcards, because they're few. You know, we don't have tons of wording in our crossword puzzles, just like most crossword puzzles don't have lots of words. So that's what you should have done with the material that was covered yesterday. And then hopefully at some point after tonight's program, you'll read all of Chapter 2 on your own. What we do is a quick read through here, a brief overview, and hopefully then when you go through it on your own, you want to do the chapter end questions. When you do the chapter end questions and you do well, hopefully you're putting those answers on a separate piece of paper. If you're scoring well by checking page 217 in your book, you always want to check page 217. If you're doing well, that's great. Then you should advance to do the online practice questions. The codes for the online practice questions are in the front cover of your book. There's codes with 6s and 7s and a variety of different numbers. They're for the exclusive use of our students, so you want to make sure you log in and do that. If you have a problem, just text our 7-day-a-week text number, 914-768-8797. All right. So without further ado, we're going to begin with law of agency, page 30. So we talk about the fact that in the first paragraph, that real estate agents are fiduciaries. Fiduciaries are held to the same legal standards of trust, loyalty, confidence as lawyers or anyone that you hire to work on your behalf. Please know for test purposes that a real estate agent or any real estate licensee, whether you're an agent or you're a broker, you are considered the fiduciary in a fiduciary relationship. Again, in a fiduciary relationship, if someone bumped into you on the street, even though they shouldn't be bumping into you right now, because we have a pandemic going on, if they bumped into you, okay, and they said to you, are you a fiduciary? If you're a real estate agent, you are a fiduciary. The client, the customer, which we haven't covered those terms yet, they are not fiduciaries in a fiduciary relationship. We're going to continue. At the end of that paragraph, we talk about the fact that a listing agreement is a document that often sets forth some of the responsibilities that we have with a client. But you can also have a client relationship where they're the client, you're the agent, and what's happening is you're putting their best interest above and beyond everyone else's, including your own. You don't have to have it in writing to make it an official relationship. Your actions, the way you operate, that's how we make it a fiduciary relationship. We have three types of agencies that you should be familiar with. The lowest one that we have is a special agency. Now, you may have saw this somewhere, or you read ahead, which is great, or watched the video that we sent you. Special agencies is what real estate agents are. We're special agents. You want to know that for test purposes. As we move up the ladder, there's general agents. General agents, usually when you see a state exam question and it's about general agency, it's going to be which of the following would most likely have a general agency. You would pick a property manager. That's most often the answer to any exam question. Universal agent is the highest type of an agency relationship that we have that's recognized by law. The thing that makes a special agency special, even though it's the lowest on the totem pole as far as responsibilities are concerned, is the fact that it's for only one transaction. You are not a special agent forever with these people. It's always got to be a new transaction. They're selling a particular home. They're buying a particular home. 7 years later, they're selling the home that you sold them. They're purchasing investment property or anything like that. It's always a unique situation. It's always a special agency, and it terminates. A special agency terminates at the conclusion of the service that you're providing. Okay? And we'll see more about that as we continue through the program. In the middle box, we talk about the fact that mutual consent is what we base agency relationships on. So you want to read through that. As we continue down the page, we talk about the fact that real estate brokers are typically paid a percentage of the purchase price. So if you use round numbers like $100,000, say the house sells for $100,000, the asking price maybe is $1,099. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because the state exam will ask you questions like this from time to time. And if you don't read it close, they work all the math out so that you completely pick the wrong answer, even though it looks like the math worked out perfectly. So read any math questions extra carefully. You don't go by the asking price, you go by the selling price. So you've got to make sure. And most properties don't sell for the asking price. Nowadays, they actually sell for more than the asking price if it's a competitive situation. And if the agent really priced that property right, it'll probably sell for even more than what the agent was asking. So if it was listed at $1,099, any word question will have that on the state exam. They'll say the home was listed at $1,099. Then they'll throw a bunch of verbiage in there to try to throw you. And then they'll say the sale price was $100,000. Then they'll throw more verbiage in there. And then you've got to see, well, what's a commission rate? So commission rates can be anything, they're negotiable, but let's say it's 6%. 6% is a common number that we see. So we know that 6% of $100,000 is $6,000. That's the total commission. But in real estate, there's a listing side and a selling side. The listing side is the side that you see from the sign that's in front. There's a sign on the front lawn, that's the listing company. Now, I know some of you know this already. This is for people that really don't know this. You know, actually, the book doesn't even tell us to explain this to you, but I know how many people don't understand these concepts or never really heard it explained before. So that's why I want to make it clear, get us all on the same page. So if the $100,000 house has a 6% commission, the total commission is $6,000. If this is a co-broker deal, that means that there's two brokers involved. But even if it's not a co-broker deal, suppose you've got one person at that office that listed the house and another person at that office that sold the house. They represented a buyer. Then what we do is we break that transaction down into 3,000 and 3,000. Because most listing agreements will say that the listing broker will get 3% and the selling broker will get 3%. They essentially split whatever the total commission rate is in the listing agreement. Now, there's a lot of long stories I could get into about some shady things that happen, and I don't want to get into that because then we'll really never get done tonight. So essentially, every transaction, there's two things that happen. There's a listing side and a selling side. So if you list that property, that $3,000 is what your commission is based on. Then whatever percentage rate you negotiate with the broker when you get hired is what they're going to multiply that by. A common number that's been used for years and that you see on state exams is 50%. So 50% multiplied by $3,000 will give you a $1,500 commission. So if you sell a $100,000 house, you'll earn $1,500. That's what you'll see on most state exams. So if you are the listing agent and the selling agent, suppose someone comes through your open house and the buyers come through and they're like, they love it, they want to buy it, and they're going to pay $100,000, and you negotiate both sides of the transaction, which of course, you know, that's a dual agency. That's what we're going to talk about tonight as well. It's all going to tie together. And the deeper we get into the course, the more I will tie things together. So you'll get 50% of 3,000 and you'll get 50% of the selling side for 3,000. So when you add the two 1,500s together, you're making 3,000. That's conceptually the way you should understand the way a commission is calculated. Is there any questions about what I just described? Now, you know, in math, there's many ways to do things. I broke it down for you step by step. So this way, anytime there's a co-broker or more than one broker involved, the logic flows really easy. Question from Stephanie. Is the commission come from the listing price or the sold price? Comes from the sold price, the selling price. That's the final number. Now, sometimes there's some creative things that happen where seller concessions, they want the commission calculated after seller concessions. Seller concessions are where the seller helps to pay fees through an economic adjustment that's negotiated, this goes way beyond the course. Like, this is not part of the program. So I don't want to complicate things for you. And sometimes when people hear math, they start to freak out. So I don't want to get into all the minutia of that. But sometimes your commission rate is based on the net price after sellers' concessions are paid. Okay. Any other questions here? Yes, we're on page 30. Yep, we're on page 30. Okay. So, so the whole reason why we were talking all about how commissions work and the calculations of things is because the middle of the page we discussed with you that real estate brokers are typically paid a percentage of the property's final sale price. Okay. Now, you can work out a flat fee. There's companies that do flat fees. So, like, you might find that if you ever get into the business of listing land, sometimes what happens is offices have what they call a minimum commission. And, you know, I remember in a previous class, and since we're now at the beginning of the book again and we're looping through, you remember how I told you the program's a lot like Groundhog Day. It's actually a lot like our lives are right now with being in quarantine. It's like Groundhog Day. We just get up and we do almost the same thing every day, a lot of us. So you might find that you want to have a piece of paper where you can write down, and at the top of that piece of paper, put down questions I want to ask my future broker. And one question that would be good to ask is, does the office have a minimum commission? Because it's nice to know that before you need to know that. And what I mean is that if you have a situation where you could list a property that's maybe a really low price, maybe it's a vacant lot, maybe it's a dilapidated property, a property that was part of it burned down or whatever. There's companies have minimum commissions. You don't want to get a 6% commission of a $7,000 sale. Like, that's not exciting money at all. And it turns out that when you sell a home, if it's a $100,000 home or $1 million home, you do the same exact work. For the most part, you're not putting that many more hours in, whether it's a low price or a high price. And you have to give the same high quality service to both parties. It's not like, well, I'm not making as much, I don't care. It doesn't work like that in real estate. So you should know what your minimum commissions are. So I would write down, if you're starting a list of questions to ask my broker, and I'll try to make a point of making these suggestions to you as we go throughout the program. If you review some of our past uploaded videos of sessions, you'll see where I mention these things to you. Well, you should ask your broker this, and you should ask your broker that. I like it to be, how I like our classes to be interactive as much as possible? Well, I like you to be interactive when you're meeting with your new broker and say, okay, I got some questions I wanted to ask you. And then you go through and, it'll be impressive to them. They will be impressed with you having these good questions to ask. So, and you need to know them anyways. So you learn a lot about someone. You learn a lot about someone when you ask questions, particularly how they answer the questions and if they even know the answers to the questions or not. Okay? All right. So as we continue on page 30, in the bottom, we have a please note item I want to bring to your attention. When you hear the word customer, you should know that we don't have a fiduciary relationship with customers. We owe customers F&H, fairness and honesty. Again, that's fairness and honesty. In other words, with a customer, you're not putting their interest above and beyond everyone else's, including your own. We're not doing that with customers. But you can't go out of your way. You can't break laws. You can't suggest things that are horrible and evil that could impact a customer. You always got to follow the laws. And we'll give you some examples as we continue through the pro. I don't want to steal the thunder, especially because it's easy to get off track doing that. Okay, so bottom of page 30, we talk about disclosures, mandatory disclosure. Now, there's a lot of different disclosures we use in real estate. We're going to be talking about the agency disclosure. It's a written disclosure form that proves that we had the discussion about agency with your buyer, with your seller, with your landlord, and with your tenant. We have a property condition disclosure form. Way different. It's a way different form, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. And then there's other disclosures that we'll see. But always be careful. When you see the word disclosure, make sure you should make a mental note. Are we talking about agency disclosure or property condition disclosure? That is really, really important, folks. Don't forget that. Page 31. We talk about the multiple listing system. Multiple listing system is a place where we pool all of the listings together. Essentially, the multiple listing system is the reason why we don't represent sellers like we used to back in the olden days. In the olden days, we used to represent sellers. Everyone represented sellers. Again, the source of your commission is not the place where you say, oh, you're paying my commission, I owe you my fiduciary responsibilities. No, it's not based on money. Real estate's kind of crazy, and you may not have known this at all, but typically, if I pay a plumber to fix a leak, he or she is fixing that leak for my benefit, whether it's a rental property I own, whether it's my personal residence, whether it's my friend that I want them to fix it. They're doing that for me. Okay, so technically, they should put my interest above and beyond everyone else's, including their own, for that job. In real estate, it's not like that. Who you owe a fiduciary responsibility and who's paying you are two separate things. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even matter who's paying you. What matters is that all you do is worry about providing high quality service. The money will follow. You heard me say that before in previous sessions. And the other thing that matters is that follow the fiduciary responsibilities that we're about to cover in the next couple pages. I don't want to steal the thunder, but you'll see what the difference is between what you have in a fiduciary relationship, which we haven't defined, and of course, customers, we owe them F&H, fairness and honest dealings. Okay? So as we continue, we talk about multiple listing. That's where in different regions, like in Western New York, there is the Buffalo Association of Realtors. They control the multiple listing system, and soon we'll see what they call a profile sheet. And a profile sheet is a page that has all the different information you fill out whenever you list a property. That information gets inputted so that it lands up and it produces those highlight sheets that we use when we take people out and show homes. And we say, well, here's a sheet on this property and here's a sheet on the next one that we're going to see. And it tells them the square footage, tells them any updates at the property that were made. It's like a little mini sales sheet. It tells them bedroom sizes, if there's a full basement, all the details of the house are on there. We'll see that in a moment. Okay. In the middle of the page, we talk about the fact that the mandatory written disclosure for agency, again, the mandatory written disclosure for agency is exempt from two types of properties. Vacant land. So if it's vacant land, you don't need to use the agency disclosure form, or buildings with 5 or more units. Okay. At one time, condos or cooperatives in buildings with 5 or more units were disclaimed, but they got rid of that. So now it's just these two items. So you should be aware of that. Talk about brokerage and agency at the bottom. We continue on top of page 32. A lot of these items we've already discussed. The bottom half of page 32, I've already defined those 3 types of agencies. And we identify them as 3 types of agencies that can be delegated by the client or principal. Now that's one thing I want to bring to your attention. The client or principal, they're the same. Principal is another name for client, client's another name for principal. They're synonymous. The bottom page 32, in the bold, mutual consent between the principal and the agent. That is what's required to create an agency. That you should know for test purposes. At the bottom, we have some bullet points you should be aware of. If a listing agreement is involved and the term is for more than a year, that's not bold by accident, folks. If it's for more than a year, it has to be in writing to be legal. Okay? If it's a lease or a rental and it exceeds 1 year, it also must be in writing to be legal. But a listing or lease for a period of a year or less does not have to be in writing, but it is highly recommended. Okay. Then we have page 32A. So there's lots of important information on here. And the emailed video that we sent you, you want to make sure you really watch those video inserts carefully, because we do a really good job of explaining all the intricacies of agency. So we don't want to repeat every single thing that's covered in those. We're highlighting things and we're trying to accentuate the most important information during our live segments. Advanced consent to dual agency is something that's relatively new. It wasn't always around. It's about 10 years old now, maybe a little less. And this was something added to agency. Advanced consent to dual agency was something that was added between the Department of State and the law department and the different boards of realty around, the New York State Association of Realtors. All of this was added because essentially New York has terrible agency laws. In most other states, see, here's the thing. Most other states, they don't allow you to be a dual agent. You saw clearly in your book that dual agency in chapter 1, dual agency is allowed in New York State. Most states don't allow that because when you're a dual agent, you have to split yourself right down the middle. And how do you give 50-50 in a real estate transaction? How do you give 50-50 agency representation to two different parties? We're human. It's almost not possible. And I believe because of the laws and the lawyers in New York State, sorry if any of you are married to a lawyer, but I believe it's like a way to give yourself a job, keep the courts busy. Most states, instead of dual agency, what they do is the minute you've got two clients in a transaction, they have you become what we call a transaction agent. And a transaction agent doesn't owe anyone fiduciary responsibilities. You essentially become a paper pusher. You just do the paperwork and you don't owe this one or that one any responsibilities. Because if you don't owe them any fiduciary responsibilities, you can't be accused of favoring one party over another more. I never met a buyer who paid more for a property or a seller who didn't sell a property for as much as they wanted. Almost never. And if they did, it was such a minuscule amount that it's like people will not sell for less than they want to if they really want to make that deal, and vice versa. It's not like you have a gun to their head. Sure, there's situations where people are being transferred and they've limited time, but that's not the other party's fault. That's not the seller's fault if the buyers have to make a quick decision. That's what we call under duress. So as a result of all of this, they figured out that as long as we've got all this dual agency stuff to deal with, the likelihood that you're going to run into a dual agency is pretty good, probably in the 40% range of all transactions. It could be higher, but that's a conservative number. But that's a big number. It's not like it's not like your percentage of getting struck by lightning is pretty small. It's like pretty good that you're going to run into a dual agency, because the big 3 or 4 companies in our area sell over half of all the real estate. And some of the big companies have lots of branch offices. And we're not here to give advertising to various offices, but you know who they are. You drive through neighborhoods and you see the sign, they're all the same company, okay? So the chance that a Williamsville office is going to sell an Orchard Parks listing, it could happen. People are moving for job or whatever, the same company, same real estate company, but they have a Williamsville branch and an Orchard Park branch. And all the big companies have branches in the same towns for the most part. So the chance of a dual agency is rather large, okay? So read through page 32A. We get into all the detail about the fact that you actually want to sign off as an advance consent to dual agency because the likelihood is there. And it's really, most importantly, it's letting the client know that the chance that someone from your office who's representing a buyer could purchase the home. And the one thing I like to tell people that I have worked with over the years is, like, the first thing I tell them so that I never have to lose sleep at night is, don't ever tell me the time to do this is when you're showing them the agency disclosure form, and say to them, I have an extra policy that I actually like to discuss, which is, don't ever tell me the most you're willing to pay for a house if they're going to buy a home, or the least you're willing to accept for your home if they're sellers that you're going to represent. Because if I don't know, then I can't share it with anyone. So if a dual agency happens, there's nothing that I know that can compromise your negotiating position. I don't know about you, but those words have definitely increased the trust factor between me and my various clients in the world. And there's no downside to that, unless you're a shady agent. If you're a shady agent, well, then that could affect you because, you know, some of the, we call them the realtors from the Wild West, which kind of like they do whatever they got to do to make a deal. They're kind of the realtors that give real estate agents a bad name, which is a shame. And what they do are things like, you know, they say, oh, come on, you could pay a little bit more, and they get the sellers to go a little bit less. And they like their focus isn't on their client. Their focus is on, we got to do whatever we got to do to make a deal so I can get a commission. And those are horrible realtors. Horrible, horrible realtors. If you know people like that in the world, don't recommend that they get their real estate license. That's horrible kind of people they have in the business. You should only be in this business if you can put your client's interests above and beyond everyone else's, including your own. If all you do is focus on the money, you shouldn't even be in this business. People will see through it, and you will have a hard time making money in the long term. You'll make money, but it's going to be like heart attack central for you. It's going to be very stressful. It's not a good way to think. I don't know if it's like that with all sales. I've only sold real estate, but I would say that it's not a good way to operate. Am I making any sense? You all got eerily quiet. I'm hoping that you didn't, like, is it making sense? Let me know. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. So we're going to look at page 33. Page 33, the most common way of creating an agency relationship is through what we call an express agreement. Then we tell you what an express agreement is in the sentence that follows. An agreement that is expressed in words either spoken or written. Again, an agreement that is expressed in words that are either spoken or written. It's in bold, so you should want to make a flashcard for that, okay? The most common written agreement that creates an agency relationship, and I alluded to this earlier tonight when I was talking about, you know, the one with that sign in front of the house, that's a company that listed the property, is a listing agreement. And that's actually between the broker who sponsors you and the seller. You'll see when you see a listing agreement from the company you associate with eventually, you'll see your broker's name pre-printed on that form. And then it'll say by, you know, BY colon, and then that's where you sign your name as a representative of that firm. Because you want to think of a brokerage firm as like a big, big umbrella. Think of a big umbrella that broker's holding. And under that umbrella are all the different agents that he or she sponsors or that company sponsors. And if that office, like a Howard Hanna, like a Hunt Real Estate, any of the different companies that are out there, if they have branch offices, well, it's a really big umbrella that they're holding. Like it's all the branch offices all over the state. Okay? As we continue, please know that when you see the word incorrectly, almost nowhere in real estate do we use the phrase incorrectly. So if you have a question that says incorrectly, your answer will be agency by estoppel. Let's take a look at the full term. That means you should be pulling out an index card now. An agency relationship may also occur if someone stated incorrectly that for another person is his or her agent, and then a third person relied on that representation. Now, in all practicality, when I'm in the classroom talking about this, people look at me like I've got three heads, like, what are you talking about? You may be looking at me right now like, what are you talking about? The good news is, don't knock yourself out. This happens so rare that it's not worth the stress of getting into it. But it could happen. And if it did happen, you need to know that we call this an agency by estoppel. Sometimes people rely on things that other parties say and observe and thought, which may not necessarily be accurate. That's all. Don't think too hard about it. Please review agency by ratification as well as gratuitous agency. Then in the middle of page 33, we look at different ways to terminate an agency. One good way is death. It's a good way to terminate lots of things, it turns out. But read through it. You'll see that a lot of these things make sense. Bankruptcy, revocation by the client, like a listing agreement, for example. Listing agreements, that's only permission to market the property. You do not have to sell your home. When you sign a listing, you do not have to sell it. You can change your mind. Most people do go through and try to let the realtor do their job. The number of people who have you cancel a listing, it's in a few years, you should be able to count them on one hand at the most. So don't think that's like a normal thing. Like when we were talking about how many people really don't pay a commission, somebody had asked that question yesterday. It really doesn't happen much, and neither does canceling a listing. But sometimes things happen. Sometimes their job transfer doesn't go through. Sometimes stuff happens. So as a result, they don't have to sell a house. But you got to think about it like this. If that happens to happen and you did have the opportunity to have open houses at the property, you probably met buyers who landed up buying something else. So you still didn't waste your time with that listing because you made a friend. They're probably going to refer you to other people because they had a good experience with you. Remember, in real estate, it's nice when the glass is half full. Try to be that kind of person. You really want to have a positive attitude. I know these days it's a little hard to have a positive attitude, but really be positive. Positive is like if you got to slap yourself, positive is important, okay? With everything in life, But for real estate, if you're having a grumpy, horrible day, it's not a great time to go out and talk with buyers. It's going to come through. So you got to be in the right mindset. It's really important. As we look at the bottom of page 33, again, we reiterate that a client always has a right to cancel a listing agreement at any time. Page 34. We talk about brokers' obligations to their client in the middle of the page. So this is something you want to know for test purposes. You want to know what CC load is. C, confidentiality, care, loyalty, obedience, disclosure, accounting. Not accountability, but accounting. So you want to know all of those. And then we give you examples of what we mean. I'm not going to read each of them for you. You can do that on your own. Now again, after you read this, when we meet again next Tuesday, feel free to bring any questions that you've got as a result of going through the material. We have additional notes at the bottom of page 34, continues on to page 35. The first full bullet point, the second paragraph of page 35, I just want to talk a moment about that. The broker must keep their principal informed on the status or form of the earnest money deposit. So we remember earnest money. When you hear earnest money, you should think of good faith and vice versa. If you have a extra flashcard available, you should write that on there if you haven't already done that. We'll see that coming up again because you know how things keep repeating themselves. So if you don't have a flashcard that says good faith deposit, earnest money, you want to make sure you make one up. But that's not the main reason we're looking at this. If a check that was deposited into a broker's account bounced, it happens, unfortunately, more often than we like. And it represented the first deposit on a principal's real estate transaction. Okay, so what we're saying is that you're the listing agent. We have a pending sale. The deposit was put in, and 2-3 days later, you found out that the check bounced. Well, what I would normally do is I would contact the other agent and I'd say, hey, their check bounced. Was there some kind of a problem? And then you give them a few hours to look into it. Hopefully you're calling them when it's business hours and they can contact the bank and find out what happened. If it can get worked out, great. But you still have to let your principal know what happened. I prefer that it was some administrative silly thing, not the money's not there. Obviously the money wasn't there, but maybe the transfer hadn't gone through, but the money was confirmed. You don't want to keep your client out of the loop. You definitely don't want to do that. Again, you put yourself in the shoes of your client. How would you like to be treated? Do you want secrets kept from you? Well, it's not the way you should operate either. Okay. A lot of real estate is treat other, the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated, So as we continue here, the broker would be considered negligent not to inform his or her principal of this material fact. This type of information could give an indication of the purchaser's ability to buy the property or lack thereof. So as you've heard me say before, and I'll say it again because we have new people that join all the time, selling the house is the first step. The harder part is keeping the deal together. And that's one of your jobs. You can sell all the houses you want, but if you don't keep your deals together, you're not going to make any money in real estate. So as a master of ceremonies, you got to make sure that everyone's doing what they have to do. And if I start seeing an issue with a property that's a pending sale, especially a co-broker transaction, that means that another company brought in the buyer, or I don't know about the buyer, it was outside of my company, then I want to make sure that I find out what's going on, because you could be losing buyers that were also interested in that home, especially if you just had an open house over the weekend. It'd be a horrible situation to lose a buyer because this other deal's falling apart. And you want to know something that's crazy? If you think life is rough in New York, there's other states where when you sell a house, it's not even really sold. The seller can still accept another offer from anybody in the world for up to X number of days. Sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's 7 or even 10 days. Talk about that being a stressful situation. But we're not like that in New York, I'm happy to tell you. At the bottom of page 35, we look at the terms puffing and fraud. So when we talk about the word opinion, statements of opinion, that's what you want to know on your flashcard. Put that on one side, statements of opinion, and it's statements of opinion not to defraud. That's puffing. That's a term that's unique. Actually, I think about all the different states that I've been involved with over the years, Massachusetts, Florida, Connecticut, and nobody else uses the term puffing. I've looked at national exams, they don't use the word puffing. So New York is a real unique puffing term place. So puffing, okay? But the next step after puffing is fraud, So fraud is fraud. That's pretty straightforward, You don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. Puffing's bad, okay? You got to be honest in real estate. You really have to. There's no secrets. And now with the internet, everything is Googleable. If that Googleable, is that a word? Googleable. Everything's Googleable. So you can't hide anything. And even time doesn't even pass. There's still things from the 80s you can find, and I don't think there was much of an internet back then even. So you just gotta, honesty is the best policy. Everything comes out. It's no mistake that we're talking about this, because that leads us into the final paragraph of page 35, where we talk about latent. Latent is another word for hidden defects. There are many defects that you could run into in a home. If I see a discoloration on a wall in an odd space towards the bottom of the wall, now don't forget, now who was that? Was it Einstein? Who dropped the apple, or the apple hit someone on the head? Was that Einstein or Newton? Maybe Newton? This is where you get actively involved. Who's the scientist, the smart guy that's very dead? Who's that guy that the apple hit him on the head? And he realized that gravity works like the way it does. I'll wait for your active participation. It was Newton. Oh, okay. So if you're looking at a wall, there's a connection. There's a connection, I promise you. If you're looking at a wall and it's discolored towards the bottom, you just don't think that it's just a bad paint job. It's probably not a bad paint job. I've inspected tens of thousands of homes over the years. It's probably a water problem. So you need to ask the seller, when you list a property, you need to ask the seller about anything weird that you see. Anything that's atypical or unusual should be discussed, and then send an email to confirm that you had this conversation, so you never get sucked into a legal issue at a later point. Because having the conversation but not documenting that you had the conversation is almost like the conversation never occurred. I kid you not. It's really, really important to document your conversations. Question. Yeah, so there's lots of latent defects that even home inspectors don't find. But at least if a home inspector is involved, the chance of finding them increases exponentially. I know that for our home inspection program, we basically teach our people that if you look at every square inch of a home and document it and take a lot of pictures, like when I do a home inspection, I'm taking at least 140 pictures of every house, sometimes 200, sometimes 100, but always like 140 is my average. And you got to look at it a couple times. Like a good home inspector goes around the house a couple, 3 times. You don't just do one quick walk. If your home inspector is going through a house in an hour or less, he or she is missing things. Like I would not use, unless that house is 400 square feet, which it probably isn't, I would not be using a home inspector that zips through a property because you miss things. The American Society of Home Inspectors averages that for every 300 properties, a home inspector misses something major. And that doesn't mean you start worrying about it once you get to 299. It can happen at any point, okay? So it's really important. And you, as real estate agents, you need to look at every square inch of the house. Like you gotta critically look at it. You know, you're getting into a very litigious business. People want to sue anyone with the deepest pockets. So if you work for a big brokerage, you are more appealing to sue than maybe a smaller company. But believe me, lawyers are generally happy to sue anyone that they can sue to help their client out if they feel that their client did not get the proper service that they deserve. Okay? So what I'd like to do now in my ever-ending struggle to make class as exciting as possible is we're going to have a quick video segment that's going to give me a great segue of something to talk about that will, and remember before I said, knock your pants off. So without further ado, please pause while I make the logistical movements necessary so that you can see this video segment that's really, really important.
The 3-bedroom, 3-bath home had been renovated and expanded by a local house flipper with high-end appliances, fixtures, and finishings. It looked picture perfect.
Show me, because I am looking at this gorgeous kitchen and I'm saying it all looks good. What's wrong?
So when you look at it, things you wouldn't even realize. Receptacles are not permitted the way that they're installed here.
The list literally goes on and on. Improper light canisters, a fire hazard, a bathtub installed incorrectly. The emergency shutoff to the charming gas fireplace is behind the fire. And the new heating system had a 25-degree difference between the 2 floors.
It turns out there's not even a certificate of occupancy for this property. There is too large a space.
They only found out because a DC inspector called investigating complaints from other homeowners who bought from the same flipper. And then came the killer code violation.
We purchased a 3-bedroom, 3-bath unit and then found out that the bump out that holds 2 of the bedrooms and 2 of the bathrooms, this addition is illegal. And the city has the authority to make us tear it down.
The McGuires are now working with the city to bring the home up to code, but it'll likely cost more than $100,000. And that's on top of the $630,000 they originally paid. Unfortunately, stories like this are becoming more and more common as more flippers get into the business.
A lot of times we'll see where there's termite damage or water damage in a house, and it literally just gets slapstick, right over top of it. So it's literally doing lipstick on a pig.
Stephen Carpenter Israel works only with buyers and helps them see what is behind the walls.
Flippers, the bad ones, won't pull permits. And at that point, you've got a huge issue because no one's looked at this.
He recommends flip buyers pull all the permits on the renovation, check that inspections were completed, ask for all disclosures on upgrades including receipts and warranties, have a professional termite and mold inspection, and make sure the property has a certificate of occupancy. And most of all, don't be fooled by fancy appliances and finishings.
It's a good emoji, Stephanie. It's frightening, right? And that's one story. There's many, many situations like that out there. Aren't you excited to become a real estate agent now? But honestly, you know, right now, like, I'm only worried about you. Like, you're my biggest concern as a real estate agent. And the question from Jackie is, was the realtor partially to blame for not seeing if permits were used? No, actually, you're not responsible for that. But I'll tell you, this is a great time for me to plug the video that we've already uploaded to our YouTube channel that talks about an idea to keep yourself out of trouble, an idea to limit your liability. You really should watch that, because you could actually start making that up. You're right at the very beginning of the program. This is a good time to have that 8.5 by 14 sheet, write in 6-point font or type it out on your Microsoft Word with narrow margins. And I would tell you that this is a really good time to start typing out everything you want to know as a buyer, everything you want to know as a seller, and put in their laws that affect you from in New York State. And let them know that getting permits is not such a bad thing to do, but this is not part of your function as a real estate agent. Because you might say, well, why can't we do that? Part of it is the liability, because if you pull permits that were done on the property, the logic behind you not doing it is that if you do it and then something's missing or something was done wrong, then you're in even more liability. You know, it's almost like the crazy thing that people have heard over the years where, you know, someone's walking down the street and they fall down and they get hurt, and you want to help them, and like people say, oh no, don't touch the person because you could actually hurt them more. And people have been sued for helping the person who got hurt, whether they got hit by a car, they got hit by a bike, or who knows what, So if you're trying to help someone, you could actually get sued because you should have touched them because you made it worse, sort of thing. It's almost the theory behind why you don't pull permits. I believe. I never was told by anyone why, but that's the logic that's my powers of deduction is why I would say that. So I want to tell you something. What that video made me think of is something that I want to share with you, and then you can make an executive decision as to whether or not you want to do it or not. But ever since I learned about what I'm about to share with you, I have never, ever bought a home, and I've bought many homes since I learned about this a long time ago. I would never buy a home without doing this. If you're familiar with the concept of a credit report, most people are. You hear about FICO and credit scores and things like that. It's all over the TV for years and years and years. Well, there's also a report that you can get called a CLUE report, C-L-U-E. CLUE report, C-L-U-E, stands for Comprehensive Loss Underwriter Exchange. Yep, CLUE report is correct. Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange. This is a report that you have the right to pull up on yourself. It's under the Fair Credit Equal Opportunity Reporting Act, all of that good stuff. A CLUE report is available for 7 years on your 7-year history. It's also available on property history. So every single property, you could pull up a CLUE report. Now, when I say you could pull up a CLUE report, I mean the owner of the property can pull up the CLUE report, or an insurance representative can pull up a CLUE report. You can't pull up CLUE reports on properties you don't own. Oh, Lisa, can anyone contact the town, city, village to request building permits? Yes, so you can go to any municipality where a property is located and look up anything on any property. There's nothing confidential when it comes to real estate, nothing. So you can see if a celebrity, if a Buffalo Sabre, you want to go look up one of his houses, you can look at anything that he or she's done. You can see the floor plan. There's no secrets. No secrets in real estate. Is this something you recommend your buyers requesting from the seller? Okay, so Jackie, that's the $64,000 question. Is there a 64,000 question? I think it's a 64. I am very persuasive, so I started doing this after I was an active real estate agent. But if I was an active real estate agent, I would ask my broker what they think. And if they said, yes, that's a great idea, then great. If they said, are you out of your mind? No. I would ask why. You could include it on that sheet where we talk about how to stay out of keep people out of trouble. How to not keep people out of trouble. There's a sheet that the video that I'm referencing where it says the how to limit your liability in real estate, an idea to limit your liability in real estate. If you put that on that sheet where you list everything a buyer should know about real estate in New York, and then on the reverse side, everything a seller should know about real estate, you can include that on that list. And then when you give that, that might be a less threatening way. It could be a less threatening way of approaching your broker. And maybe, instead of asking, say, hey, you want to review my sheet that I made up in school? I think I'm going to start using this so I can limit my liability. Will you review it and let me know if you have any problems with me using it? And then send an email saying, oh, it was really great meeting with you the other day. I'm glad I gave you my form, whatever you're going to call that form, so that it's documented, because between you and me, a percentage of people will do that and a percentage of brokers will never read it because it's how people are. So, but at least you did everything you can do, so, but that's how I would handle it. I think I would probably do it the latter of the two options and put it on my form. And then April's asking where do you obtain it? So you just Google, how do I get a clue report? And it should take you to the LexisNexis website. The LexisNexis website, that's the depository. And, at one time, the statistics were 65 to 75% of insurance companies put their information in there. Now it's a higher number, because it turns out that insurance companies will pull a clue report on you. Because if you're the kind of person that every time the wind blows and breaks a door, you file a claim. And then the window broke, well, you filed a claim. And then something else happened with the roof, the corner of the roof, and you filed a claim. And they consider you high risk if you are always filing claims, because, like statisticians, they keep track of all these things. And it turns out that they know they know what the percentage is. I don't know what the percentage is, but the people in the know what's normal for you. How they know for like car insurance, they know that like 16 to 20-year-olds tend to have more car accidents than 30 to 40-year-olds. Okay, they don't just dream it up. They know from all the statistics that have been gathered all over the years, and they probably know. They even know the time of day that most accidents happen and the demographics. So that's like a whole world of statistics, and that's what happens with insurance. If your number is too high, then you're going to pay higher insurance rates. Because you're higher risk, because you're always putting claims in. Like, why are you have such bad luck that there's so many claims going in when the average number is 3 and yours is 7? Wow, something's wrong there, So it's just not like wow, Susie's having really bad luck. Susie's just bad luck. Like no, it's like there's a reason. Like like if you remember back from a few sessions where I was talking about how I remember when I was a kid and people would wait for the roof to leak so they could get a new kitchen out of it, like that's the kind of stuff that happened that causes us to have the Clue report now. It's been around a long time as well. And you obtain it, you just Google it, and it comes from LexisNexis. Okay. Any other questions? So I wanted you to know about the Clue report. You're not going to be tested on it, but it's I always reserve the right to share with you practical information that will make you a better real estate professional. Okay. Page 36. Company listings and agency. Company listings and agency. We sort of talked about this already. The fact that you have a real estate office that may have multiple branch offices, and like you're a sub-agent of the broker who sponsored you. You're an extension of him or her, okay? You're sitting across the desk from somebody, and they're an extension of that person. That's why if the person that sits next to you at the office has a buyer for your property that you just listed last week, that's why it's a dual agency. Because if you're holding up an umbrella and you've got two clients, their buyer is a client, your seller is your client, but you both work for the same firm, that's why it's a dual agency. That should be very simple and straightforward to understand. Sometimes people struggle with that. You can have two clients in one transaction, but if the buyer's coming from a whole separate company, every company holds one umbrella. So if Howard Hanna lists the house and Hunt Real Estate has a buyer, two separate companies. It is not dual agency. Is that clear? Let me know that that's clear. I really want to know that you get that. Because it's easy to read through all the gobbledygook and say, oh my God, this is so complicated. And I just don't think it's complicated. Clear? Okay. Good. There is no two separate Hunts because there's one Hunt Real Estate and they're not a franchise. So Peter Hunt is the CEO, and every branch office, it's like one big umbrella. They're all under one umbrella. Now, if you said Century 21, when you get into a franchise, there's Century 21 Winkelhofer in Clarence. There's Century 21 Gold Standard in East Aurora. Separate companies, separate owners. Century 21 is a franchise, but then the name that follows is the individual franchisee, okay? So that's different. That's still considered, but if like Century 21 Winkelhofer, they have, I think, 2 or 3 offices. I lost track. I don't always follow that stuff. So if they have 3 offices and their Grand Island office has a buyer for their Clarence listing, then that's still considered one umbrella. Okay, so just always think of that umbrella. The umbrella is the broker and all the offices associated with that broker. Okay. Yeah, they're not franchises. Surprised that they actually haven't done that, but they haven't. So, okay. Page 37, just give that a cursory review. Nothing complicated there. Page 38, we covered most of this. The bottom of 38, we talk about in-house sales. And that's the example I gave you. When you're sitting across from that person and you listed it, and the person at the next desk, they have the buyer, that's called in-house. In-house is when you're under that umbrella, okay? In the middle of page 39, we talk about the fact that agency does not determine the source of compensation. Agency does not determine the source of compensation. But we mentioned that earlier, so you're good with that. We talk about when it might be difficult. Just read through that on your own. There's nothing super complicated there. It's like if you're a real estate agent and you're buying a home for yourself and you're representing yourself and you're buying a listing that your company has. So the person sits next to you, they list a house, and you're like, oh, wow, I love that house. I need to buy it. Well, that's a dual agency. Like, you would not even be able to not be your own exclusive agent. Like, because you have to represent yourself. So 2 clients in 1 transaction gives you a dual agency, okay? If your relative, assuming a relative that you like, wants to buy a house, you can't not represent their best interests. So that means you owe them CC load: care, confidentiality, loyalty, obedience, accounting, disclosure. You owe that anytime you have a client relationship with someone. So the fiduciary relationship, where you put their interest above and beyond everyone else's, including your own, you owe them CC load. Like, that's what you owe them. The person that listed the property, they owe CC load to their client, the seller. 2 clients under 1 umbrella means we've got a dual agency. And sometimes you'll see a question on the state exam where they try to trick you and say, oh, is that illegal? That's illegal, right? And it's not. It's not illegal in New York. Other states it is. So don't fall for the trap. They make it seem really terrible, but it's very legal, okay? It's very common as well. All right, page 40. Again, we talk about, remember I said a lot of things repeat over and over again, so that's a good thing, so you can't forget it. Read through and just know that it's 4 units or less is the number of units. No vacant land. You know, if it's for vacant land, if it's 5 units or more, then we're not going to use an agency disclosure form. You don't have to. There's no law that says you can't use it. It's just that the law doesn't say you have to use it. But you have to use it if you have to use it if it falls under 1 to 4 family. You have to use it. Okay. We discussed vicarious liability in the "Did you know" box at the bottom of page 40. So just give that a read through. You know, we know that vicarious liability is being responsible for the actions of another. We don't want to be responsible for the actions of another. So the main reason why we talk about vicarious liability is that if you're a sub-agent, think about it like this. The reason why every time you do something wrong in real estate, your broker gets sued too, is because they are sponsoring you. So they're supposed to be supervising you. You are their sub-agent. You're an extension of the broker. You're an extension of the broker that supervises you. That's why he or she should be supervising you. And if I was teaching a class full of brokers and managers, I'd be telling them to document that they are trying to supervise you. Some offices that you go work at, they have 180 agents under the 1 supervising branch manager. That's a lot. Like, I don't know if they're physically able to supervise all these people, but they do it, and the state doesn't have a requirement. Some states have requirements that only a certain number of people can be supervised by X number of brokers. New York doesn't have that. So that's the way it is. On the next page, we have a sample disclosure form. We don't teach you how to fill it out. You'll learn that when you associate with a broker. It's almost like when you see contracts here. When you see contracts, if you see contracts and forms in your book, New York does not have as part of the syllabus that we go through and show you how to fill it out. Like, you're not going to learn how to fill a contract out here, or agency disclosure form, or property condition disclosure form. We let you know they exist. We let you know when they need to be filled out, which is almost always. But You learn all of this with the broker who supervises you. Because every office, sometimes they add things to their forms. Sometimes they have different ways of doing things. They have different, philosophies based on the lawyers that their firm deals with. So that's the reason why we don't show you how to fill forms out. But it's worth reading through. Definitely read through that. And then if you see the form that says refusal to sign agency disclosure form, make sure you see that form. It's like the next page in. It's got like a little waterfall. Okay, so sometimes, not often, again, remember, I have an honest face. So most people, they just sign whatever, they always sign whatever I would put in front of them, okay? And maybe you have that face too. I don't know. You might have that situation. But for the few people that just have a philosophy of, I don't sign anything unless my lawyer reviews it, okay? This is why the good Lord made this form. Well, the Board of Realtors made it, but you know what I mean. This is the refusal to sign agency disclosure form. Okay? This is the form that you sign to say that the other person wouldn't sign the form that I need them to sign. Now, you don't want a drawer full of these refusal to sign agency disclosure forms. You don't want a drawer full of these because that means you're doing something wrong. Okay? But like you maybe want to talk to your broker about what's a good way for me to discuss this with people because nobody wants to sign my forms. But that's a conversation for another night, not here, okay? On the next page, we have an exclusive right to represent form. So we have forms to use to represent buyers, just like we have listing agreement forms. Page 45. In the second paragraph, I want to talk to you about the record retention rules for New York State. The record retention rules for New York State is 3 years. Please know that you need to keep records for at least 3 years of everything, even for deals that are not consummated. Sometimes you'll list a home and the deal, like nobody buys it, or it's on the market, then they change their mind. Well, you still keep that paperwork for 3 years. New York doesn't say if the deal doesn't go through, throw it out. They don't say that, okay? We talk about exclusive types of listing agreements at the bottom of 45. You should know that exclusive right to sell is the most common. I would put a little star. If I were you and I was sitting there listening to this awesome presentation, I would put a star next to that and write in little tiny 3-point fonts, most common form we use. That's why we have it as a first form. Because when you use this form, it's telling the seller of that property that even if their neighbor knocks on their door and says, hey, I'll pay cash for your house, and then they say, oh crap, I just listed it. It's sorry, now they have to pay a commission. Every once in a while, that's going to happen. And don't feel guilty if that happens because it doesn't usually happen. So for the little bit, once in a while, you get something easy in real estate. And it's like, it's mind-blowing. Like, it's really mind-blowing. Like, wow, I didn't have to kill myself. I can remember, I'm kind of a numbers guy. And I can remember for a period of time keeping track of how much effort I put into each transaction. It would be interesting to know if any of you ever write this down and ever want to get back to me in the future. It'd be really interesting to know. I would average about 24 hours per transaction. That's how much time I put in from the moment I met these buyers or the moment I met these sellers all the way to closing. I average 24 hours. And like you might be saying, well, okay, so what? Well, the so what is if you're getting a commission of $4,000 and you divide it by 24 hours worth of work, and I mean any work, if I thought about them and I was like, oh, I got to remember to write a new ad, that's counted as time. Writing the ad, submitting the ad, calling, following up, all the things you do. 24 hours was my number. I don't know what I haven't talked to anyone about that in a long time. I don't even know why I brought that up right now, but the listing made me think of it. But it's, our hourly rate is really good in real estate. But the problem is sometimes those deals fall apart. So we talked about fold ratio once before. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's interesting, especially if you come from the world of getting W-2s, which I did before I got into real estate. I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank. So, I mean, I was used to getting paid an hourly rate, before I was salaried. And, it's kind of like, it's a way we gauge things in our world, But then I want to look at the second exclusive agency agreement. This is very, very different from the first one. Exclusive agency will only protect you with all the brokers in the area. So if any other broker tries to list that property or sell that property, and you have an exclusive agency agreement with the seller, then you still get paid a commission. Here's the big but. With exclusive agency agreements, if that neighbor knocks on the door and there's no documentation that they found out about that listing as a result of walking through your open house. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, it's so important that you have an open house register and make sure you have them sign it. And I don't mean scribble, I mean like legibly. One thing that we always used to do is carefully print a fake name on the top line so that because people follow. If you don't do that on the open house register and you don't put a name for people to follow, person number one will scribble. And I mean worse than a doctor scribble. Like they'll scribble, and then number two scribbles, and three scribbles, and four scribbles. And it's like, you don't want a page of scribbles. You want a page of legibly printed names. Oh, and where it says phone number, if number one leaves no number, 2, 3, 4, 5 won't leave a number either. So you have to set an example. So fake person number one, yes, fake person number one, you put the name, phone number, you put everything in. Matter of fact, print it, because then they'll usually print it. And then sometimes what happens, sometimes you get people kind of like in our classes that don't pay attention, and you get number 3 on that list will not pay attention. So that means you have to make fake person number 4 so that they follow again. Okay, it's like you got to keep all the, what's it, little penguins? What's the thing? You got to keep or little ducks. Got to keep all the little ducks in a row, right? That's what you're doing at an open house. But with an exclusive agency agreement, this is super important, because if that neighbor comes through the open house and then they knock on the door and say, hey, don't pay the commission, I can buy it through you, and the seller knows that you have an exclusive agency agreement, this is the way you get paid when you sue them in court. And that's another whole topic. I don't want to get into all of that. It's just like what you need to know is what I covered. But just so you know, the chance of you being able to find an exclusive agency form is pretty limited. Your office doesn't want you to use exclusive agency forms. They want you to use exclusive right to sells because that gives you the most protection. That's usually the one they'll test you on a state exam. It'll either be the first one or the second one. Okay? I want to take a look at some questions that have popped up. Oh, okay. So Stephanie, what if they refuse? So here's a question from Stephanie. What if they refuse to sign the exclusive right to sell? Okay, they got to sign that. That is a listing agreement. There's no way around that. You give that to them and say, okay, well, have your lawyer review it, because you can't, that's your permission. A listing agreement is your permission to market the property. Like that's like, there's no refusal to sign the exclusive right to sell agreement form. Like we don't have that, okay? What if they use a fake name? Can you ask for ID? Actually, the fake name thing doesn't happen too much, but if you take my advice and you go to www.erie.gov, remember we talked about this before. Now, our new people don't remember this because you weren't even here. How would you remember this, right? So before you go to any listing appointment, you should go to erie.gov. Then you click on online services. When you click on online services, and that's under the county clerk's office, when you click onto that, pull up that property address and see if the current owner matches who you think you're meeting. You can also pull up tax records for that property, because you're going to have access to the multiple listing system at that point. And they have a beautiful They have a whole beautiful thing on how to pull up tax records that you'll learn when you associate with a firm. So if you're meeting with people that their name doesn't match up with the public records, then everything Gino's saying could be happening right now. So you don't want that to happen. Is Emma still awake, by the way? Like, does this girl have stamina or what? Like, when my kids were little, they had lots of stamina, but is Emma awake? I'm just curious. Stephanie, no, that question was for the refusal to sign the agencies. No, Stephanie. So the refusal to sign the agency disclosure form, they don't sign that. You sign that saying that they didn't sign that. Can you use an incentive for them to leave their contact info? Oh, Jackie, you know what? I have never had that question before. That's actually a really good question. Yeah, I'm happy to tell you. Now, don't tell anybody in Albany because they'll probably make a law out of it. You know, it's funny. All the cool concepts and like fashion, real estate, I can't think of the word I want to use, but you know, like the cool things that we do with renovations of real estate and stuff. It all starts in California and moves east, and then all the laws and regulations starts east and goes west. That's like how real estate works. And yeah, so Troy, don't tell anybody in Albany, but no, there's no law against that. And you could do that, but you know what's funny? Most people just do it. And if you tell people, can you please make sure to sign the register? They will do it. Like just put your authoritative hat on. People will do, you know what the funny, most people do what you tell them to do. So just tell them. But yeah, I mean, you could do that. If you're running into a problem, then I'd say you should do that. But of course, ask your broker, always ask your broker for a suggestion. But for the most part, people sign the form. Or people, yeah, they sign the form. They sign the open house register. Bernadette, let's see. Do you know if there are any true or false questions on the state exam? No, New York doesn't allow that. So any school exams will not have true and false, and the state exam never has true and false. Always 4-choice, multiple choice. Oh yeah, don't make yourself true and false flashcards. No, we don't. No, they don't have those. Oh, that's funny. Oh, nice. Yeah, that's cute. So open listing, you're driving down Transit Road and you see 7 signs on a property. It's not because the seller's confused. It's not because the seller signed agreements with everyone. We call it an open listing agreement. Open listing agreement means whoever procures the sale gets paid. That's what an open listing agreement is. Buyer listing agreements is like the exclusive right to the agreement we saw earlier in the book. So just read that through, no big deal. But on the next page, page 46, you should know for test purposes, that net listings are illegal. That's the top of page 46. Net listings are illegal. Oh, okay. Yeah, so net listings are illegal. You should know that. But let me just tell you in practice what a net listing is. A net listing is where, suppose you go to a listing appointment and the person says, look, I paid $90,000 for my house. As long as I get 90, as long as I get my money out of it, that's all. Like, there really are people like this. I've never met them, but like there are people like this I've heard. As long as I get 90,000, you can keep everything above that. That's why net listings are so illegal. So yes, you definitely, yeah, you should know that. And that's the logic behind it, is that if you're a unscrupulous agent, then you would keep that 100,000 above that, which obviously just doesn't happen, but it could happen. So interestingly, net listings are not illegal in every state. They're definitely illegal in New York. We talk about the workings of a listing in the middle of 46. I encourage you to read that. And then the bottom of 46 on the next page, we talk about the information you take when you list a property. Now, you're not tested on this. I kind of included it because to me, it was logical to talk about it, you know. So all these little spots, you're supposed to write one character. And normally, like here's a fun question to ask the broker that's going to sponsor you. Remember that thing we were talking about earlier tonight? This is what you say. So, Mr. Broker, if I come to work for your firm and I list a home, do I enter the information into the multiple listing system, or is there someone here that does that? Some companies you do it yourself, and other companies you don't. And if you do a whole bunch of stuff and they're not paying you so much, you know, gives you another point of reference. But I guarantee you, no average person asks the questions. And I've only started. Wait till we get through more of this. You're going to have more and more questions. They're just going to think you're a rocket scientist with all these questions. Like, nobody has all this stuff. But I would want to know why, like, because if this is more work for you, every minute you're doing this, you're not hanging out with your family. You're not marketing the property. You're not going to your next appointment, you know? Yeah, so Stephanie, you fill the form out, but then does it get entered into the computer by someone else? That's not fun to do, because that means that's another system for you to learn. You got to learn how to do that. Then you got to learn how to use the regular system, and then you got to learn to use the other stuff, because a lot of them have like a management system in place that it's complicated. It goes beyond what we could talk about here. But how common is it to change a broker? Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but a fair number of people go to the wrong broker first. I would say my gut feeling, an educated opinion, would be 20 to 30% of people change brokers in the first year. And that comes mostly from not asking the good questions that we ask you to ask. We have a really good video on our YouTube channel that says how to pick a sponsoring broker. It gets into really good detail of super practical questions, and I haven't seen anything that covers them that way. We made it up, you know, I put that together because so many people make that mistake. The minute you change offices, and you have to remember, if you're there for 3, 4, 5, 7 months, people are used to seeing you there. Well, they're not going to rush to like refer you to the next office. A lot of times that person on desk duty will take your business, you know, and that's just opportunities lost. One house sale can be thousands and thousands of dollars out the window, which could have been averted if you had asked better questions up front. So I'm a big fan of making sure you really interview carefully and don't just go with whoever you like, just go with because of whatever, you know. Redfin, I don't know a lot about Redfin from personal experience, except that I really don't know a lot about it. I know it's people use it. I think it's a real estate marketing thing, but I don't really know too much about it. How about I look into it, and I'll because I like to know about things. So, and like everything in my life is real estate, so I'll look into it, and I'll comment next Tuesday. Okay, Redfin. Yeah, I know it's real estate something, but I feel like one thing I know about Redfin is they charge you money to help promote you. If you know that I'm right, let me know, because I think I know that part about them. Teresa, I went to an open house and they handed out sheets for feedback on the house with your info left on it. I thought that was pretty cool for feedback. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to do that, because one thing is, if you have an overpriced listing, it's really nice to get feedback to share with your home sellers. Now, keep in mind that you're the bad guy. When you share that information, when you're the bearer of bad news, they usually take it out on you, no matter how reasonable and rational you think they are. So you got to handle that with kid gloves for sure. But that's nice to get feedback. Now, just to let you know what normally happens when you list a property and you take your office through on. Remember I said Tuesdays, they have office meetings. A lot of offices have meetings on Tuesdays, sometimes on Wednesdays, sometimes a different day of the week, but those are the common days. And when you go through and, especially if you know that it's overpriced, you want to get comments from the people in the office. The only problem when people in your office give you comments on the particular, like when they go through the property, is that the seller says, oh, well, they're all from the same office. They're just sticking together. That's what the average seller will say. So, but when they start getting it from an open house and people say, now, sometimes your people that go through, especially if there's neighbors and things, they don't want to put on there. Even if you say it's anonymous, they feel guilty like, oh, I don't want to knock someone's house. I would just rather tell you how terribly overpriced it is, But then there's other people that are real happy, If you've ever gone on Yelp, you can see how people just love to beat the crap out of, a business if they get one bad dinner, even though the last 12 were great. So, people, I'll tell you, people are really awful, and you need a thick skin to be in real estate, because I'll tell you, I know at the school we bend over backwards to try to give everybody the most for your dollar. We really try hard, and we care about you. Actually, we really care about you. You're not a number when you come here. And it's not like that at every school. As a matter of fact, you're lucky if they even give a crap, because believe me, I've talked to enough people who've gone to other places for other things. And, the funny thing is that people who you're trying to help think nothing of snapping back at you, and they don't look at the big picture. They don't look at the big picture, especially if you're in real estate. They don't say, well, wow, I might need that person to help me. They don't realize what a small world. Western New York is a small world. Francine has a saying that I really can't say all of it here because it's not appropriate, but there's something you don't do where you eat, and I'll let you use your creative fill in the blank, okay? But there's a lot of people that are happy to do it all day long. And, you just never know. It is such a small world. It's like a freakishly small world. And, you think it's just okay, Buffalo's a small world. I talk to our New York City agents that take our continuing ed. They tell me what a small world it is. So I just think it's a small world. I think everything is just a small world. I don't know, it's just the way it is. So you really want to keep that in mind as you operate in the world of real estate, for sure. If you think I'm kidding, go ahead and try. Don't say I didn't warn you. What else do we have here? Would you mind repeating the answer? Would you mind repeating the phone in the broker's office? My son came in and I was distracted. What did I say about the phone broker's office? This will be uploaded after a little bit of editing in about a week-ish, maybe 7 to 10 days. So watch it again, because I don't remember what I said exactly. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Desk duty. Okay, yeah, so desk duty. Desk duty is the thing that where sometimes they call it opportunity time. And what happens is, at one time, everyone could get a lot of desk duty. Now, not a lot of offices have lots of agents, so you might get 2 opportunities a month to sit at the office for a certain period of time, like 3-hour times, 2-hour times, 4-hour times, and then you answer all the calls. So you take all the normal calls, and you also, if a buyer or seller calls in, and someone calls in and says, oh, hey, I want to sell my house. I see you got my neighbor's house for sale. Those are the great times to be on desk duty. They're few and far between because it's a numbers game. Technically, the more you do desk duty, the more you get those opportunities. But, you don't get rich off of desk duty, but it's a nice thing to do. You kind of do your part to help answer phones and team thing. It's like part of the thing we do in real estate. You take messages for your fellow agents and they take messages for you. Anyone that does desk duty is taking your messages just like everyone else. So that's why desk duty is a nice thing. gives the administrative staff a little break so that they can get other things done, you know, because the more expensive everything gets to do, people don't think about costs. People don't realize that running a brokerage, running any business, there's costs involved. And if you spend a lot of money on a more administrative staff to do more things, where do you think it's going to come out of? That commission is only so big. You can only split it up so many ways. And it's like that with everything in life, you know. It's just something to think about. So you're doing your part to help control costs, have a more efficient operation. It's a good thing. We are on the page that follows 46 is the page we're on. We're almost done with this chapter. So I was talking about this form. That's what got us off on a tangent. It's practical. So this is the form. This is called the profile sheet. You're not tested on this, but this is the form that you fill out when you list a property. So that means that you need a copy of this. When you join a firm, they're going to give you blank forms like this. Maybe they'll have it electronic by the time you're there. Maybe they only do it electronically. But when you fill it out, this is what your admin staff will use to put it into the multiple listing system. So that means you need all this information. If you don't have this information and there's information missing, then the multiple listing system, the board of realtors that is, can find you in your office. So you do want to be able to fill in all of this information. Okay, and that's covered on the next couple of pages. Okay. And if you flip another page, you can see the property condition disclosure form. We'll talk more about the property condition disclosure form as we proceed through the program, but this is a form that you cannot fill it out. So on the top of this blank area, at the top of the property condition disclosure form, you should write on there, I cannot help seller fill this out. I cannot help the seller fill this out. By statute, you cannot help sellers fill out the property condition disclosure form. They can ask you a question like, how do I find out how many amperes I have at my property? And you can direct them to the service panel box and that top breaker, that top big breaker that's above the two rows of, the two columns of breakers. You could say, well, the one above it usually has a number, and that's usually a pretty good number to use. But I'm not allowed to help you, okay? If this form is not filled out, there is a $500 credit that they have to give to the buyer. A $500 credit has to be given to the buyer at closing if this is not given out, okay? And they call this the PCDS. It's the first letter of each word, property condition disclosure statement, all right? We don't teach you how to fill it out here because you're not supposed to fill it out. But you can read through it so you're familiar with the questions, okay? If you read through this and you need me to explain something to you, feel free to mention it at our next class, okay? And that continues through. And next page is 47, page 47. We talk about the truth in heating law. That's like next to that person with the bugle that's in their hand, the truth in heating law. You should know that the truth in heating law applies to 1 and 2 family properties and requires. So that means that when you list a 1 or 2 family home, you know how many broker students we have that take the program that don't even know that they're supposed to do this? When you list a 1 or 2 family home, the truth in heating law affects them. And that you need to ask your sellers, have you done any upgrades to any insulation, ventilation, any energy efficient things to your home? Because that information has to be made available to any buyers of that home. Now, this would be a perfect example of something to put on that sheet that you heard me reference a few times this evening. Everything you want to know as a buyer, everything you want to know as a seller of real estate in New York State. I hope that makes sense. Like, I cannot believe that nobody does that. The few people that actually do it from our program are the few people that do it. Like, it's just mind blowing. I feel like when you leave here, Once you finish and you graduate and you know, after all the pomp and circumstance, you become an agent and people start to fill your head full of, oh, you don't need to know all of that. That's not important. No, we don't do real estate like that. They're so wrong. They're so wrong. Your chance of getting sued and making mistakes jumps exponentially when you don't do what we covered here. I am not filling you full of you know what. Like, what I'm telling you is legitimate information that you should sell real estate the way I'm telling you. Plus review that with your broker to make sure that you're not breaking any office policies. No one's going to tell you what I'm telling you is wrong. Like, I swear to God, if I was a scout, I'd say Scout's honor. Do that, but so in the middle of page 47, you don't need to know zone A, B, or C, but I provide that to you because you'll see it when you look at the profile sheet. When you look at the multiple listing profile sheet, it'll say zone this, zone that. You hope that your property is in a zone C or a zone X, because if it is, that means you're not in a flood zone. That means the buyers of that property will not have to get flood insurance. That's a good thing. It's a really good thing. If they're in zone A, then they have to, and if they're in zone B, then they might have to. That's all you need to know. Talk about mandatory statements for all exclusive listings on page 48. Read through that. Essentially, when you have an exclusive agreement, whether it's an exclusive right to sell or an exclusive agency agreement, you need to have on there a statement that explains what it means. That's all. We're on page 48 right now, 48. We're rapidly getting through the end of this. At the bottom of 48, let me just make sure. I believe we go to 52. Well, we go to 51 tonight, so we're getting there. The bottom half of this page, 48, we talk about the Sherman Antitrust Act. Make sure to read through that. The big takeaway from this page is that, and again, this was all reviewed in the materials that we emailed you in advance, but the big takeaway with the Sherman Antitrust Act is that you want to make sure that you're not leading your sellers to believe that everybody charges the same rate for commission. You say every office charges whatever they're allowed, whatever they want to charge. The state does not dictate commission rates. Always make sure that you do that, okay? Page 49. You should know the second full paragraph. The Sherman Act is enforced through the Department of Justice, DOJ, Department of Justice. And then you need to know the fines per company and per individual. So a corporation, that's at the second last sentence of that paragraph, a corporation found guilty of violating the Sherman Act can be fined up to $1 million. And then it goes further to talk about an individual. Individuals can be fined $100,000 and or sentenced to 3 years in jail. That has shown up on the state exam in the past. We talk about the bottom 49 and through page 50, we talk about your relationship with your broker and your independent contractor. Your broker can't make you work a certain number of hours. You can work from home. They can't make you work certain days. They can't give you benefits. If they do too much and it looks like you're an employee, then they have to pay your half of the taxes that employers typically pay. That's all discussed on 49 and 50. Page 51 is the only page in your book that we dedicate on how to pick a broker. I would read this and compare it to our in-depth video on our YouTube channel that is how to pick a sponsoring broker, and that'll help you. You're not tested on this, but it's I think it will help you to maybe make the right decision up front, or at least ask the right questions, you know. And then we have an independent contractor form on the page that follows 51. The independent contractor form, you will learn, and you should know for test purposes, that once every 15 months, no later than 15 months, but most people do it on an annual basis. That's how often you fill out an independent contractor form. I regret to tell you that a lot of people, when they do the independent contractor form, they do it once when they join the company, and then they never do it again. So it all depends on how organized the paperwork is at the office you associate with. Okay?